All right, so development of the heart. So the development of the heart and the vascular system, it starts in the middle of the third week of gestation when the embryo is no longer able to satisfy its nutritional requirements by diffusion alone. So first arises the concept of a progenitor heart cell. Like every cell, there is a progenitor of that particular cell. So the progenitor heart cell, they lie in the epiblast immediately adjacent to the cranial end of the primitive streak. Now, as we know, the primitive streak is nothing but just a columnar set of cells that arises in the epiblast and which eventually breaks off as a component of various adherens junctions. Right? As we have seen what is the primitive streak exactly, we shall be focusing more on the progenitor cells which have arise just in front of the cranial end of the primitive streak and even in front of the the formation of the neural tube right here. So just cranial to that we have the development of the primary heart field, right? But this rest is temporary. That is the cells of the primary heart field which is present in the epiblast right here, right? They will migrate through the streak and into the visceral layer of the lateral plate mesoderm. As we know, we have three types of mesoderm. That is, the intraembryonic mesoderm gets differentiated into three different kinds of mesoderm. First, we have the paraxial mesoderm, right? We have the intermediate mesoderm, and finally we have the lateral plate mesoderm, which is further divided into somatopleuric and splanchnopluric lateral plate mesoderm. So these cells which have arise in the epiblast, they will traverse the primitive streak and they will come to lie just in the splanchnopluric layer of the lateral plate mesoderm, which is right here. It might be interesting to know that the space between these two lateral plate mesoderm, that is the somatopleuric and the splanchnopluric mesoderm, there is a cavity known as the intraembryonic cavity, and where the primary heart field has formed, just opposite that the intraembryonic cavity will later give rise to the pericardial cavity. Now just continuing further, we have two types of heart fields. We have discussed one, that is the primary heart field, but we have another heart field known as the secondary heart field, right? The primary heart field, as we have just seen, arises from the epiblast and it came to lie in the splanchnopluric layer of the lateral plate mesoderm. This layer, that is these cells, that is the primary heart field, will give rise to most of the atria, most part of it, plus the entire left ventricle. Whereas the secondary heart field, which will form just in the visceral layer of the lateral plate mesoderm, ventral to the pharynx. By saying the visceral layer, again, these cells also arise from the splanchnopluric layer of the lateral plate mesoderm. Primary heart field and the secondary heart field. Now the secondary heart field is supposed to form the right ventricle. It is supposed to form the outflow tract of both the ventricles, that is the left and the right ventricle. The outflow tract composes of the conus cauda and the truncus arteriosus. As we have seen previously when we discussed about the primary and the secondary heart field and the subsequent structures they gave rise to, here is something very interesting molecularly. How does a body decide what's right and what's left? Well, there have been some theories about it. So basically what happens is, for establishing the left side of the body, we have some transcription factors to enable that. Due to some reason, which is still very unclear, we have an accumulation of serotonin, that is 5-hydroxytryptamine, on the left side of the embryo. There have been some research about it, what causes it. It has been postulated that there is a selective action of the cilia that is present in the embryo, which beats the amount of serotonin that is present and limits it to the left side of the embryo. That is one theory behind it. And that is very relevant because we see something known as Kart-Kenner syndrome. Like we have 5-hydroxytryptamine, that is serotonin, being stopped from crossing over to the right side and accumulating on the left side. Now this 5-hydroxytryptamine is supposed to stimulate the production, it is supposed to stimulate the transcription of a transcription factor that is known as nodal. This nodal transcription factor, as you can say, why does then nodal cross to the right hand side? Well, there has been a theory behind it that 5-hydroxytryptamine also stimulates another transcription factor known as MAD3, and this protein actually stops nodal from crossing to the other side. And we have the role of these transcription factor as well, which includes sonic hedgehog, we have LEFT1 and ZLC3. They prevent nodal expression from crossing over. Now we have seen that we have stimulated nodal. Nodal as a transcription factor will further stimulate LEFT2, and LEFT2 will ultimately stimulate the master gene of left-handedness that is known as PITX2. Now this PITX2 is basically responsible for telling the body what organs are supposed to be on the left side and promoting their differentiation. Scientists have also postulated that there is a similar cascade which occurs on the right side as well, but it's in the nubile state. We don't exactly know about it. Alright, so we were discussing something clinical, what happens, what is basically the significance of learning this, of learning these laterality pathways. Well, there are situations in which the heart is on the right side of the body. Like the major portion of the heart should lie on the left side of the body. But in some cases, we have something known as dextrocardia, and that says the heart is present on the right side of the body. Why does it happen? It happens either if you have something known as Kart-Kenner syndrome. Kart-Kenner syndrome, also known as primary ciliary dyskinesia. And if we know the word dyskinesia, it means less movement. So what is less moving? So there is basically a mutation in dynin, right? And dynin, as we know, in eukaryotic cilia is a critical component in facilitating movement. So that is one reason when you can get dextrocardia, as the selective action of the cilia for beating or basically inhibiting 5-hydroxytryptamine to crossing to the right side, that is inhibited in Kart-Kenner syndrome, and hence the chances of dextrocardia. We have another clinical situation in which we use something known as SSRIs, that is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Also known as tricyclic antidepressants, which we usually take for depression. They are not preferred when a female is pregnant. Basically, what happens is there is a slight possibility that 5-HT, normally being localized to the left side, that is being established by sonic hedgehog, LEFT1 and ZLC3, it can cross to the right side as well. So to stop that, we don't recommend using SSRI, as they are reuptake inhibitors. They can lead to the accumulation of 5-HT on the right side of the embryo as well. Now, as the body establishes its left-right axis through this pathway, we have another situation, that is the primary heart field differentiates in a medial to lateral direction, and it gives rise to the subsequent structures in a lateral to median fashion as well. So as we know, the primary heart field is in the shape of a horseshoe, and medial to laterally we have the development of the truncus, then we have the conus. These both will contribute to the outflow tract, and then we have the right ventricle, the left ventricle, and the common atria. Then we have the contribution of the secondary heart field, which, as we know, will give rise to the outflow tract. Now, as we know that the left ventricle should give rise to the aorta. Well, how does it decide it? How does the aorta decide that it should arise from the left ventricle? Obviously, we have the significance of the left-right axis that we have previously established by using nodal and PITX2, that is the master gene for left-handedness. And similar case, like right ventricle, why will it arise from the pulmonary aorta? That is just because the pulmonary aorta knows from where it should arise due to that left-right axis that we have These cells, they're induced by the pharyngeal endoderm to form cardiac myoblasts and blood islands. So what happens is that the endoderm, the pharyngeal endoderm, will tell the primary heart field, which is arising in the splanchno-pleuric layer of the lateral plate mesoderm, and will tell them through some molecular pathways which we will discuss involving FGF8 and BMP4, BMP2 and 4, which we will discuss it further sections of this video. So what we are seeing is that the primary heart field, which is present in the splanchno-pleuric mesoderm, it is induced by the endoderm to develop into blood islands and to develop into cardiac myoblasts. Now what will happen is we get a formation when these blood islands will unite. They will form a horseshoe-shaped endothelial lined tube surrounded by myoblasts. So we have myoblasts and we have the endothelium. So this region is known as the cardiogenic region. The cardiogenic area has formed, that is in shape of a horseshoe. We have two foldings. We have a lateral folding and we have a cephalocaudal folding of the embryo. Initially, this region, that is the cardiogenic region, that is the endothelial tube and the myoblast, this region is anterior to the oropharyngeal membrane. This is the oropharyngeal membrane, and this is basically anterior to the oropharyngeal membrane and the neural plate, which is right here. But with the closure of the neural tube, the brain vesicles grows cranially and extend over the central cardiogenic area. So what happens is that these brain vesicles will outgrow the central cardiogenic area and they will basically surround it. These brain vesicles, once the neural tube has closed, it will surround it. And finally, the heart, which was earlier in a cranial portion of the embryo, it will occupy the thoracic region. It will move downwards as the brain vesicles cover over it. The second folding that happens in the cardiogenic area is the lateral folding. Now what happens is, let's think of it as this way. This is our tube, and what happens is, due to this lateral folding, the two ends of the tube which are present right here and right here, this is the first end and this is the second end of the same tube which is connected anteriorly. As the embryo folds laterally, as this comes here and we close the ventral body wall, these two will get approximated too. As these two get approximated, this tube will get approximated in the center and they will fuse. They will fuse right here, except at their caudalmost ends, right? So as the embryo grows and bends cephalocaudally, it also folds laterally. And as a result, this horseshoe-shaped tube, paired cardiac tube, merges except at the caudalmost ends. Simultaneously, the central portion of the cardiac tube expands to form the future outflow tract in the ventricular regions. Now this primordial heart receives the venous drainage at its caudalmost ends and begins to pump blood out of the first arch with the dorsal aorta at its cranial pole. The first arch will pump the blood into the dorsal aorta, and further that will get distributed into the entire embryo. Now there is something about the dorsal mesocardium as well. Well, as we saw previously, the intraembryonic cavity that is just over the developing cardiogenic area or the primary heart field, that develops into the pericardial cavity. As the heart moves inside the pericardial cavity, it will remain attached to the dorsal wall of the pericardial cavity by something known as a dorsal mesocardium. This attains significance because the dorsal mesocardium is not just simply a remnant, it just gives rise to some important structures. It gives rise to the epicardium. It will give rise to the epicardium by forming something known as a pro-epicardial organ. And this pro-epicardial organ will later engulf the heart, and that will form the epicardium. Then we have something known as the dorsal mesocardium protrusion, which will later give rise to the pulmonary vein, as we will see in the next sections. Alright, so we had formed the cardiac tube. Now let's jump into the cardiac tube in itself. This is a very gross simplification of what a cardiac tube looks like. So we have some regions of it. First, we have the region of the atria, that is the common atrium. Second, we have the common ventricle. Then we have a portion known as the bulbus cordis, which comprises of three structures. We have the proximal part, which is unnamed. We have the conus cordis, and we have the truncus arteriosus. Initially, when the heart tube has formed, the atria lie outside the pericardial cavity, and as we all know, the pericardial cavity was formed by the intraembryonic cavity, which just overlaid it. Due to structural changes in these cells, basically we have the formation of something known as the cardiac jelly, and we have some structural changes as well. So due to those factors, what happens is we get a formation of the cardiac tube. This cardiac tube, it basically rotates. The caudalmost ends of it, that is the atria, they rotate in a dorsocranial fashion and to the left. So they will rotate backwards, they will rotate cranially, that is towards the head, and they will rotate to the left. And the topmost, that is the rostral portion of it, that comprises of the truncus arteriosus, which will ultimately form some structures. We have the rostral portion of it rotating in a cephaloventrally and to the right. This leads to the formation of a primitive primordial heart, in which the structures are quite reversed, and during this process the atria which were outside the pericardial cavity gets incorporated inside the pericardial cavity. So the atria will form, the atrial portion will form the primitive left atrium, and it will form the primitive right atrium. The primitive ventricle will get trabeculated. The ventricular portion of the cardiac tube will get trabeculated to form the left ventricle, and the parts of the bulbus cordis, the proximal part of the bulbus cordis, will form the trabeculated part of the right ventricle. The conus cordis will form the outflow tract of both the pulmonary artery and the aorta, and the truncus arteriosus will form the root of the proximal aorta or the pulmonary artery. This portion of the cardiac tube, that is the bulboventricular sulcus, it is reflected onto this primordial heart as the atrioventricular canal, and it is still narrow. So if this is the atrioventricular canal, just proximal to it and distal to it, we have trabeculations. The trabeculations just proximal to it, that will be the right ventricle, and the trabeculations that are distal to it, that will be the left ventricle. A bit about the molecular development of the heart. The development of the heart by the splanchnial pleuric mesoderm, which later gives rise to, as we have studied, it gives rise to the primary heart field, then the secondary heart field, which will ultimately form the cardiogenic area, and the cardiogenic area will further form the cardiac tube, and the cardiac tube is a resultant specification of different structures like atria, ventricles, outflow tract, etc. Right. So the main transcription factor that is responsible for this specification is NKX 2.5. It is a transcription factor first isolated from Drosophila melanogaster. This transcription factor in that Drosophila was also known as Tin Man. So the upregulation of this NKX 2.5 seems to be the major driver behind the specification of the splanchnial pleuric mesoderm to become the cardiogenic area. Now this is regulated by another set of factors that are released by the endoderm. The endoderm releases factors such as bone morphogenic factor 2 and 4. BMP, bone morphogenic factor proteins, are basically dependent on the TGF beta signaling, and they will stimulate the production of NKX 2.5, which will serve as the transcription factor, assisting this conversion of the splanchnial pleuric mesoderm. But just in contrast to that, we have the neural tube, and the neural tube expresses Wnt proteins, which is a primary factor in the Wnt beta-catenin pathway, stands for Winglis INT1. Now these Wnt proteins are supposed to downregulate the amount of NKX 2.5 present in the mesoderm. So to counter that, we have the production of Wnt inhibitors, also known as Wnt inhibitors, by the endodermal cells, which will inhibit these Wnt proteins, and some of them are Cerebrus and Crescent. So Cerebrus and Crescent are Wnt inhibitors that will inhibit Wnt, and they will disengage this inhibition of NKX 2.5 by the Wnt proteins. And on the other hand, this BMP2 and 4 also functions in a different way by stimulating FGF8, that is fibroblast growth factor 8, which will further lead to expression of some cardiac specific proteins. So we have developed the cardiogenic area. Now what about the specification of different regions of the cardiac tube? So to specify the venous portion of the cardiac tube, that is, if we draw a cardiac tube right here, and if this is the venous portion of it and this is the outflow tract portion of it, if this is the venous portion, so the venous portion is basically specified by retinoic acid. And when retinoic acid is presented to the venous portion, that is the atria, will then start to express the enzyme retinaldehyde dehydrogenase, and they will start to produce their own retinoic acid. So high amounts of retinoic acid will specify the venous portion, whereas at the outflow tract region, lower concentration of retinoic acid will lead to development of more anterior cardiac regions, that is the ventricles and the outflow tract. And as we discussed, there is one more factor that keeps playing a role multiple times, that is PITX2, the master gene of left-handedness. Well, in this scenario, PITX2 plays a major role in looping, the thing that we studied previously, that is looping, which was dependent on the deposition and functions of the ECM molecules, that is extracellular matrix molecules, which were expressed in the form of cardiac jelly. Just to summarize the concept of a cardiac jelly, the cardiac jelly is like, if this is the endothelial portion, if this is the endothelium of the heart tube, or we can say the primordial heart, and if this is the myocardium, the cardiac jelly is formed somewhere in here. So this ECM molecules is the cardiac jelly, right? So the PITX2 plays a major role in looping, and then we have the role of, once again, NKX 2.5. Now NKX 2.5 also plays a role in the specification of the ventricles. NKX 2.5 upregulates two transcription factors known as HAND1 and HAND2. HAND1 has been supposed to play a role in specification of the left ventricle, whereas HAND2 in the right ventricle, right? So it basically, NKX 2.5 also plays a role in the differentiation of the ventricles. So just to summarize, we had NKX 2.5, that was the major driving force in the conversion of the mesoderm into the cardiogenic and ultimately the cardiac tube. Then we had the role of BMP2 and 4 secreted by the endodermal cells, which stimulated NKX 2.5. And we had the role of Cerebrus and Crescent, which they were inhibiting Wnt protein secreted by the neural tube, which was inhibiting NKX 2.5. Then we had the specification of the venous portion of the heart by the retinoic acid signaling system. And to conclude, we have the upregulation of HAND1 and HAND2 in the ventricles, which will specify for left ventricle and right ventricle respectively.